Hi everyone, thanks for joining me today. My name is Katie Edwards and I'm the Senior Medical Provider here at Trident Anti-Aging. Today my goal is to try to provide some information on the background and purpose of anti-aging medicine, as well as to shed some light on common misconceptions of the practice. We live in a very diverse world, but there is one thing that we all share, whether we like it or not, and that is the fact that we're all aging. Now, anti-aging does not mean stopping the aging process, but controlling the way in which we do it. I think if given the chance, we would all choose to age gracefully. Now, grace is obviously defined a little differently for all of us, but I think most of us would opt for healthy, active, and comfortable lives. That is what anti-aging medicine seeks to accomplish. Understanding how and why we age, I think, will help make how we can control it make more sense. So let's get started. So bear with me. This presentation is a little bit cheesy, but I think it helps to understand how and why we age. So we're going to start with Steve and Cindy Stone. They're going to be our representations throughout the course of this presentation. So Steve and Cindy were born a long time ago, back in caveman time. Evolutionarily and biologically, our bodies are still programmed to be like cavemen. So if you can kind of picture yourselves back in that time, it helps to make sense of what our body's experiencing nowadays. So there's obviously a difference between what our bodies are doing as infants and children as what they're doing now as adults. So we're going to kind of compare and contrast what's happening to try to make sense of that. The pie graph on the left-hand side of this slide, that represents what our body is using our fuel supply for. So our body uses calories as fuel. So if we're using our fuel, the main ways we do that is either by growing, by being active, or by recovering. If we're not using the fuel, we're storing the fuel, and that's where the fat storage comes into play. As kids, our body's main priority is growth, so that's where most of our fuel supply goes to. We have much less fat storage at that point in time because our body's using our calories more efficiently. If you look at the graphs on the right-hand side of the slide, the sleep and the metabolism are kind of the other aspects that we're going to look at. So obviously we know kids and babies sleep a lot. They don't always like to sleep at nighttime, but they're sleeping a lot more throughout the daytime. And kids and babies' metabolisms are through the roof. Again, that's because the body is using the fuel. Metabolism is a relationship of how our body is utilizing our calories. So there's a much higher use of calories at this point in time than there is later on. So now fast forward a few years to our teenage years. So puberty is a rare and unique time in our body's lives as far as how it handles and manipulates our fuel. So growth is still a priority, but our activity level is much higher as teenagers, and so our body needs more fuel devoted to our recovery side of things. That then leaves less room for the fat storage than it did even as children. You look at the sleep and metabolism side, sleep is still high. Now our body's starting to kind of filter out the different timing that we need to sleep. We're sleeping more during the nighttime than we are during the daytime, and our metabolism is still very high. So this again represents how efficient our body is in utilizing the fuel that we have. Now fast forward to adulthood. Obviously, things are a lot different now for Steve and Cindy than they were when they were born. So now if we look at how our body utilizes our fuel, you see there's a lot of difference. The main difference is once we pass puberty and teenage years, our body's no longer growing. So that part of our pie graph is a lot smaller. In theory, our activity should be about the same, but we know that that kind of changes as well. So the two main parts of the pie that are different are the storage and the recovery. So when our body has less fuel needed to devote to growth, it's going to store more of that fuel, and that's where the fat levels come in. The sleep level changes as well. So when our body starts to use less fuel, it recognizes the need for less sleep, and so it tells our body we don't need as much, which is where our sleep patterns start to change. Again, because we're not utilizing as much fuel, our body's metabolism drops dramatically. So that's really the difference between where our bodies function from children to teenage to adult. So the reason that these changes occur in our body is really based around the role that we have towards the tribe. And I know that sounds funny, but if you can think of there's different characteristics for productivity versus survivability. So productivity is really what our role in the tribe and in society is. So again, if you're going back to caveman time, and I'm not trying to make any political statements here, men and women had different roles for productivity. So women's main role was to reproduce and to procreate. So cavemen were more about quantity in numbers than quality in numbers. So women needed to be fertile. So the characteristics that provided for fertility are going to be mostly your reproductive hormones. Women needed to be able to recover from childbirth so that then they could continue to care for the children. So the characteristics that contribute to that are more the growth hormone and amino acid side of things. And women needed to be energetic. They had to be able to keep up with the children and the cavemen. So again, those are the hormones and the growth hormone that contribute to that. Men, on the other hand, had other characteristics that they needed to have in order to be productive for the tribe. They had to be strong. They had to be able to go and collect the trees to make the huts. They had to be fast. They had to be able to outrun the lions and the dinosaurs. So the characteristics that contribute to that were different hormones. And they had to be able to recover because, again, they had to be able to do that day in and day out. So there's different groups of hormones and amino acids and innate levels that help our body to be able to contribute to that level of productivity. Once we pass the point of being productive, and unfortunately from an evolutionary standpoint, that was once we passed the point of being able to reproduce, then we just wanted to survive. So from a tribe standpoint, our bearing and our influence started to change. So we just needed to be low maintenance. We needed to be able to protect ourselves and to stay warm. And unfortunately, fat is the answer to all of that, especially central fat. So when our body starts to think about protecting itself, it wants to protect its vital organs, our heart, our kidney, our liver, our colon, and that's all located right in the central part of our body. So to put a layer of fat there was, from an evolutionary standpoint, smart. That's where our body really started to protect itself. So what's the difference? The difference between then and now is obviously we're living a lot longer than cavemen used to. Also, I think most of us are wanting to live a little bit different lifestyle than cavemen did and be productive a lot longer than just kind of surviving. So this represents kind of the most common symptoms and complaints that my patients come in with. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions, and a lot of people say this, is, oh yeah, well, I'm feeling these, but that's because I'm getting older. And it's true, but if you can find the source of the symptoms or the cause of what's causing these things to come about and fix that, a lot of times you can offset or minimize a lot of these symptoms, which obviously makes for a much more pleasant aging process. So you'll see men and women have some similar symptoms when we get older, and then we have some of our own unique to our gender. But by and far, regulating these can make for a much more pleasant experience. So we've been touching on this along the way, but the answer on how we fix this is we just give our body back what it's missing. So the pie chart on the right-hand side of the slide kind of represents what I think most of us would say in an ideal world we want to see happen once we're adults. Obviously, again, we can't control that growth side of things, but if we can increase our activity and increase our recovery from that activity, that's going to help to minimize our fat storage because we're utilizing more of that fuel. So the big areas that we're going to talk about are our reproductive hormones, our vitamins, amino acids, and peptides. So by finding out how we can restabilize these, a lot of times we can get pretty close to this ideal situation. Bioidentical hormones are the main way that we replace reproductive hormones. And bioidentical just means that we're going to base the hormone levels and treatments based off of lab work and symptoms. And so that's kind of key. Just because your labs show a low level of a hormone does not necessarily mean that you need a replacement of that hormone. It's really a correlation of your symptoms and the levels that your labs show. So when we talk about the different types of hormones, men and women make the same hormones just in different levels and different relations to each other. But the symptoms that they correlate to are relatively the same. So if you can increase the hormone of whatever symptom you're having, a lot of times that's going to help to stabilize it. And hormone stability is really key. That's what we're trying to maximize, is not necessarily the actual value or the actual amount of the hormone, but the stability of the level in our body. Another aspect that we look at is what we call nutraceutical therapy. So this is going to be the alternative to pharmaceutical therapy in that it deals with vitamins, amino acid, and peptide replenishment. Amino acids are literally the building block for every cell in our body. And if you combine amino acids, you're going to get peptides. Peptides our body has to work to break down. In that breakdown process, it helps to naturally release growth hormone. And growth hormone is what our body uses to repair, to recover, helps to rebuild, and helps our body to get into that deep restorative REM sleep. So when we're talking about repair of our body, one of the most easiest places to find it is in our muscles. So we see and feel muscle repair after we work out, or we're cleaning the yard, or cleaning up around the house. You're going to notice you're not as sore the next day because your body is able to repair those muscle fibers that it broke down the day before. But our body also is constantly repairing. When we have a cocktail, our liver needs to repair. When we stare at a computer screen all day, our brain cells need to repair. Our skin cells need to repair once we go out into the sunshine. So our body is constantly repairing and rebuilding. And I often describe it as, if you think of your body as a house, the older a house gets, the more building blocks it needs in order to keep itself up. Our body's the same way. So our peptides, through the release of growth hormone, helps to give it back a fighting chance in order to combat a lot of the breakdown that happens on a day-to-day basis the older we get. So what do we do now? You give us a call. So what we can do is set up your labs, get you come into the office for a consult, and then we sit down and compare your goals and your symptoms with the lab work that we find, and we create a customized therapy plan that's right for you. And then from there we can continue to adjust until we get you to your goal. So please feel free to visit our website or give us a call at 954-451-5454 and we can get you set up. I appreciate your time, and if you have any questions, I look forward to answering those for you. Thank you.